Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. Let's do a stamp sketch here in a color-themed application, okay? Or I should say finishing off in a color-themed application. Okay, so what I'm talking about in terms of color themes is that working through various media, in this case it'll be dye-based inks, and acrylic paint pens, and also alcohol markers, okay? I am just grabbing colors in those themes, okay, no matter what media I'm working in, okay? So these are all different types of media. These two happen to be water-based right here, and this one, of course, is alcohol, but you can approach your the finishing off of various works, not just, landscape stamping, scenic stamping, but anything you do in this kind of simple format, okay? Um, the only thing that you have to kind of consider is the order in which you apply these types of things. You know, if I was working on a matte piece of paper or, satin kind of silk weight type of paper, we can also employ the use of things like colored pencils here, okay? So see, there's, similar types of colors in all of the different ranges of media, okay? We have the dye-based inks right here, but, a lot of you have, multimedia, be it whatever. It could be pastels as well, okay, or something like that. This happens to be a piece of glossy cardstock, so your dry media doesn't work on here very well. You can get a little bit of coloring in here sometimes with, if you have some really soft colored pencils, but for the most part it's wet media on glossy cardstocks, okay? So for this scene right here, I'll stick with that, okay? Now, you don't have to have a big full range of values with every type of media. I typically use paint pens for things like highlights, so I'm not, going into my darker ranges of things like greens or something of that sort, or darker purples, or something of that type, to complement my, lighter pastel pinks or something of that sort. With alcohol pens, I don't know. I tend to run the range. I'll go with some darker tones sometimes, but if I use some darker tones, I'll typically blend them out with the lighter ones. Okay, so and you don't have to grab every single pen, but this is just kind of eyeballing things. Okay, and just grabbing out some that I think will work with my color arrangement that I'm going to be employing on this particular composition. Okay, so in something like this, I thought I would do something interesting, or I don't know, different, I should say. In this piece right here, these autumn trees in the background, I'm typically doing with, your oranges and reds and yellows, that type of color scheme. But one of the things that someone posted a few, I don't know, it might be 2 years ago at this point in time, but they did this kind of forest with this more of a cherry tree type of, spring foliage in the background. So the deciduous trees were pink as opposed to, the warmer kind of, typical autumn tones that you might think about. So we'll change this from autumn to spring and from, I don't know, whatever, your maples to, I don't know what kind of trees they are. Something that would bloom in a pinkish hue. Okay? So, that being said, all right. Sky is going to be blue. Trees are going to be kind of that pinkish tone, okay? And maybe some greens interspersed in there. You have some kind of evergreens in here. The grassy areas underneath the trees will be green. And then we'll have some reflections of those trees down here in the water, okay? So it's going from something like blue, pinks and greens in the middle, okay? So kind of the pinks and greens are in here, and then blue and blue. All right? So that being said, we need some kind of foundation color to bring all of these colors together. So again, something like a warm, toned, tan color, okay? I'm not sponsored or anything by antique, distress inks and antique linen and Ranger. Okay, just this one happens to be the one that I had or have that works really well for that. Okay, use any type of tone. So just a very pale but warm tone ink, whatever brand you have. Okay, and that will give us a really good foundation. Okay, to build upon. And it'll also bring the it'll be the hue or element, visual element within this piece that starts to tie everything together. We'll have other things that tie the pieces, the color schemes in with one another as well. Okay, but this is kind of a good starting point. Okay, now as I add this in, I'm, retaining a little bit of the white in here. You don't have to add, retain a lot. I barely retained anything. There's a little bit up here in the sky, and there's a little bit down here in the trees as well. I'm just going to color those in though. But there's a little bit down here in the water. So when I retain a little bit of area of light like that, we're saying that there's some white light in there in the scene, which will benefit us when we add in some additional binding element, which will be white pigment ink, in the kind of one of the last steps that we do, okay? So, visual continuity between things in color as well as in texture later, okay? All right, so that is it with that ink right there. All right. Now, you can go in with whatever you want. Let's see. Let's do the sky. Okay, those are kind of some large areas. Okay, so we'll have our summer sky and Bahama blue. I'll just switch up on my applicator here. We'll go with a clean section of it like that, and we'll take in some very light value blue. Summer sky is a good one for that, but again, use whatever you have. If you don't have a really super light blue like this one, then just go to, your medium tone, something like a Bahama blue, okay? And that'll work just fine. Okay, but as I'm applying this, I'm trying to retain a little bit of that white in there. Sometimes I go a little bit overboard like we all do, and I lose some of my blue. I think this blue is really, really light here. Let's see. Do I have it? A re-inker for this? Oh, I'm not going to bother looking. Let's just go right in with... I'm pretty sure I have a summer sky somewhere. That's one of my main colors that I typically use in the Memento line. Let's just go with the Bahama blue, okay? So yeah, believe it or not, this blue goes well over the antique linen warm tones, so it is the combination of warm and cool. Okay, so you can do that. We can do that especially because one of those temperatures seemingly conflicting temperatures is a very light value of it, okay? You can, we want to add like blue over orange or something like that, like a Halloween pumpkin orange or something of that sort. But you can do this, and look how much richer that is as a result. It's not like, oh my gosh, what warm of a sky we have, but it's just a little bit more full than, say, here's a piece of white piece of paper right here. You can kind of compare the areas right in here. Okay? Or let me show you just what this blue looks like. Okay? I mean, it's a good blue, but here's the difference between these two blues right here. Okay? This one's just, single temperature, and this one's kind of a multi-temperature right there. All right? Okay. So, let's just keep adding it in. Yeah, I'm going into some of those trees. You don't have to be like, oh my god, I took some of that blue into what's going to be a pink tree. Don't worry about that. That's not a problem. But you do want that kind of merging, of, color schemes. And I am going ahead in my grassy area down here and adding some of this blue in here, okay? Now, so this isn't conducive, this big old applicator. to get in these tighter details in here, but that's where the, the pens really come into play. Okay? All right, so that is our skies right there. All right, let's get into some of these other areas. Let's see if I can get into some of these trees with a pink of sorts, okay? This one's a pretty bright pink right here. I don't like the idea of just using this one, but I don't have too many like super light pastel pinks in my pad repertoire supplies, so I have to make up my own very dull, very light pink by just removing a lot of the moisture and ink out of my applicator right here. And I can just very lightly apply it in here so that I get a very light application. Now, one of the things that you want to avoid is when you start going like that, you're not going to see anything if you've removed off enough ink, okay? So people aren't used to that at first, using like really pale versions of a certain hue, a very dry version of a certain hue. So you're going to go like this and like say very little, and then you're going to press harder, or you're going to dip in like that and go in here, and it's going to be a big blob of some very light or dark and vibrant pink. Okay, so it's just easier just to build it up like that, so you get those real light pastels, and then it's really hard to do anything kind of unintentional that you don't like when it takes a while just to get a little bit of that media showing, just even to show, you really have to kind of apply it a lot. But what that means is, I mean, it doesn't take, forever, we're just talking a few seconds, but that little type of technique right there and process is going to save us, from any potential headache, like, oh my gosh, now I have to blend something out that I don't want in there, okay? It's just like dry. It's almost like the rate at which you're applying it's almost like applying some sort of like really dry, like very light in value chalk or something like that. You might kind of relate it to doing something like that. Okay? But then see, you get all that nice little pinkish kind of tinge going in there. Okay? Now, you don't have to develop it, a lot, because, again, we have our other media that we can, flesh things out with. This is just kind of giving us a little bit of a head start. It's kind of a textural continuity type of thing, too, between, dye-based inks, sky, trees, and grass, or whatever, you might have in a piece. Okay? So let's go with some light green here. I don't need to necessarily dry this one off very much because it's already very light in value, okay? And we're applying it. We're applying it in some of those areas where I've already applied the blue, okay? So that little green in there, kind of livening things up, huh? Because it's kind of a warm tinge in there. See that green? Okay. I mean, it's literally, that one color took like a few seconds, okay? Now, as I start to move through some incrementally, darker values of green, you might not apply it evenly. You might apply it, the darker tones, like over here in the shadows or something like that. You don't have to think about it too logically. You can just kind of oscillate it. Okay, so I'm going a little bit darker here, a little bit darker here, and darker here. So it's just more of an uneven application of that color. So when you have this kind of oscillation of darks and lights in there, it creates this lighting scheme because not everything is treated the exact same way. So you get variation that way. Okay? All right, that is that. It's literally just going like this in a couple areas. And see, I'm leaving those lighter areas, and that's what's happening throughout the little under tree areas. See where it's a little bit darker, lighter? I mean, it's not like, oh my god, I left that light. That should have been dark, that should have been light. No, it's not like that. Just anywhere there's variation, that'll be fine, okay? All right, now here's where we start moving into our darker tones, okay? So again, just kind of follow suit. If you've left an area that's kind of lighter, maybe leave it light like that, okay? I like to kind of darken in my edges, so I'm darkening in those like that. Okay. Think about it like so. All right. And that is those three colors. I don't know what it can literally take like 1 minute or something like that. You know, we're not working with a 11 by 17 or something like that. And this is a very small little band of green, but nevertheless, it can go very quickly. Okay, now I was mentioning I might bring some of this green up into these evergreen trees. There are some evergreens, you know, amongst the deciduous in here, okay? I do that for contrast in the design. And variation, okay? And now, once we go with pinks or greens, it doesn't matter. Again, let's develop those greens a little bit more, okay? Let's take a look at that. It's kind of a medium tone, so I'm just going in here and following suit, adding this in. On glossy cardstock, too, if I add too much of this, I can just blend it out or lift it with a lighter shade. Okay, there's some tree trunks in here. I'm going to make those a little bit more tannish in color. It didn't do too much. Let's bring a little bit more warmth to some of these trees in here that are going to be pink. Okay, this is a very light tan color, real similar to the antique linen. How about a little bit of this tan on the shoreline? Okay, maybe on some of these foreground rocks that are just sticking up a little bit. How about some of the trees too? Okay. All right, let's move up into a little bit of a darker brown, okay? Something like this. I can just put some of that on those trees. It doesn't look just straight brown because you get that green from underneath kind of showing through. But nevertheless, it makes for a little bit of a kind of separation between the grass, the grain grass and the brown trunk. A little bit of a shoreline on here, like this, you know, a little bit of brown. I have that kind of shoreline kind of illuminated with a little bit of light, which I like. Okay, this one's a little bit of a grayish brown, so I'm kind of going in, blending in some of that kind of more coffee or chocolate brown. Yeah, I don't know, milk chocolate brown. See that? In there, yeah, we're using these pens for more detailed areas so I can get into areas like this, you know, a lot easier. We have some shadows down here if you want to work your blues, okay, you know, you can go with something like this and create a little bit of a, more of a separation between the water area. But see, this is blending in right with, you know, the colors underneath there because it's the same hue, okay? So see how you just work your color schemes through all of your different media that you have. Now, you know, I try not to use too many things that people don't have. We have dye-based inks and whatnot. A lot of you have Copic markers and whatnot, or different brands of markers. Okay, now let's approach our tree areas in here. So I'm seeing these tree areas as not, you know, one thing to color, you know, completely uniform, all right? I want some areas that are lighter and darker within those forms, okay? So let's follow suit, okay? So I'm going in here with a little bit of this lighter pink. I kind of work from light to dark, and then I go back to light again to blend out the brighter darker, okay? I'm really approaching this really quite conservatively, so I don't know, maybe I should go with some darker tones, although, I don't know. I just have a lot more control over it this way. Alright, so see those like pink forms like that? Oh, one of the things I forgot to do was I was going to bring some of those pink forms down into my reflections down here as well. Okay, so see that? Try not to overdo it, but we'll just kind of reiterate it. I do have the forms down in the design itself, so I've given you a head start in terms of, you know, reflection, what would you call it, definition, I guess. Okay, here's a really pale pink, and I'll blend out some of that slightly darker, but still very pale pink up there. Okay. So I'm using this one as kind of like a blender pen. And if you hit it kind of early enough on glossy cardstock, it will kind of lift, that ink off. You can just kind of reconstitute it a little bit like that. Okay. All right. That is that. There's some rocks in here that are kind of, they're green because I put green over them, but the dye-based inks, I wasn't working with a detailed little tool like that. So you can go back in, and this is gray, and just kind of define them a little bit more. See, I can define my shadows over here a little bit more. And then let's go back in with, let's see, I don't know if this is a blender pen or not, but I can just go right back over that gray right here and just blend that in, okay? You kind of have to work a little bit fast, even though, dye-based inks, alcohol inks do dry fairly quickly, but, it's pretty forgiving in terms of the ability to reconstitute and to go back into solution, okay? Let's see, here's this brighter pink again, so I went with kind of light, a little bit darker, back to light again, but here's a little bit of a warmer pink in here. We can add that in like this. It's kind of spot coloring it so that there's variation within those trees of light and dark. Okay, here's a purple. I don't know if I've used this one. I don't know if I need to use it. Probably not. Okay. Just a little bit darker gray. Yeah, put some shadows down underneath the trees, and it'll kind of define shadows and light a little bit more, a little bit further. Okay. I'm looking at those trees. I think those trees can use a little bit of a warming up. Okay, so let's use some of this apricot here pen. Okay. Yeah. The grassy area too. I think that looks pretty good. Let's bring some of this apricot down into the reflections. See, we're just kind of working our themes, right? Our color themes. And here's a little bit of an even brighter pink. Why not have some of those? Where do you put the brighter pinks? Brighter pinks, if they're darker, you kind of put them in the shadow areas. So I'm kind of targeting the base of the trees a little bit more, okay? Sometimes the brightest colors are in the shadows because the light, lighting, the sunlight, or whatever isn't kind of washing them out, okay? Brighter colors typically are, colors, like on a overcast day or something like that, believe it or not. Lighter colors are more light, but brighter colors, in terms of intensity, are, when they're getting less washed out with, brighter light on them. Okay, so that was quite a bit of a brightness. Let's go back down with the lighter pink and just kind of blend that in a little bit. All right, so I thought I would use this little fisherman in here. Let's do that later. Okay, so let's go in with some of our pens now, okay? So this green, where are we going to use the green? We'll use the green in the green area. Okay, let's see if we can get this focused in a little bit here. Bring this down here. I will try to remember to not work off camera like that. Okay, so kind of adding this on the top of some of these areas. A little bit of a different tone of green. It's a very warm green, but it can also represent lighting, even though that's not really warmly lit in this piece. But see, that was it with the green, okay? This is real similar to the antique linen, so we can use that wherever. I typically use it on the top surfaces of things, okay? And in the designs, I keep saying this all the time, in the designs themselves, okay, but nevertheless it's true, but you can just follow the areas that are lighter or light on the designs with your lighter applicators like this, okay? So, on these trees in here, you see there's light and dark on the trunk? Okay, so I will re-illuminate that trunk and see how it kind of makes those trees stand out from the background, okay? Like that. It's just a subtle little thing right here, but doesn't that look more three-dimensional that way? You know, because I had green in there, but I don't want to mask that off. So it's just an easier way just to go and redefine that when you get back in there. See this area in here? You can't really see the tree trunks, right? But I just go in here like this. Notice how I flip the scene upside down so I can get in here easier to do these trunks. You can even do them down in your water and the reflections too, you know, wherever you add. You don't have to add it everywhere, okay? But now see those tree trunks in this area, doesn't it look so much more three-dimensional? They stand out more. You know, this imagery right here just looks a little bit more kind of developed. All right, now let's go in with some pinks, okay? Let's give this pink some really good texturing, okay? It doesn't really stand out at all because it's kind of the same color as what I've already colored in, but it's giving it a little bit of texture, okay? So I don't have to do too much of this. I can bring some of this pink and put it into my grassy, bushy areas, or even in the water, you know, because if there's these blossoms, it stands to reason that some of these little petals would be kind of floating around in the water, okay? I don't think this one's even going to matter here. Yeah, we can't even see it, so just skip it. Let's go to white. Okay, this is where the retention of some white will come into play here too. Okay. Okay, now the white really stands out on the pink, so that is giving me some good dimension and lighting. I can put it on tops of some of these rocks in here, right along that shoreline again. I already did it with that tan one, but getting it with the even lighter white here makes it stand out even more. We'll hit some of these trunks, you know, make some of these trunks a little bit lighter, or part of the trunk maybe, you know. We can have different kind of degrees of, you know, kind of illumination, okay? Isn't that right in there? It's kind of coming to life, isn't it? You know, bringing in this white pen in there, like that. Okay. And there we have that in terms of our color theme. Okay, let's get into some of the white pigment ink. I'm tempted to use this fisherman right now, but this fisherman's probably going to be a little bit wet after I stamp him out, and I don't feel like, I want this scene to go by pretty fast. So, here, I'm applying some of this white pigment ink onto some of these areas of my background. And what does that do? It makes it look kind of farther back in the distance, doesn't it? When you do something like that. When you kind of diffuse something and you make it look lighter, okay? It looks farther back in terms of distance. But from a textural standpoint, too, we can kind of introduce some of this, and it becomes kind of a lighting type of situation where you have, fog or mist, moisture in the air, and it's being illuminated by the fog. So we have a textural change that's happening right in here. So right in here, it's all sharp and, defined, which looks good, but I think this looks even better when you have it kind of diffused and sharp and diffused again like that. So you have this oscillation of textural, I don't know, whatever statements, I guess you can say. Okay. I mean, I think it would look good if you just did it over the whole thing, but I think it looks better when it's varied like this, okay? All right. Have that. And if you're curious about pigment ink on glossy cardstock, it's just a very thin layer of it, so it dries just fine. And then what you do is you spray seal it afterwards, after it dries or before it dries, whenever you want. Okay, so let's stamp this fisherman here. I'm going to do him in the Brilliance ink just because it dries so fast. Alright, maybe I should do it in dye-based ink. I don't know. Let's just do it in the Brilliance. Brilliance inks are a pigment ink that can dry on glossy cardstock. But, I mean, I could just use dye-based inks or something like that on here, too. Okay, now, I'm wiping off the bottom of this. Okay, so that that reflection will be a little bit more kind of diffused and lighter when I stamp them out down there, okay? And that's just a little trick, okay? See, this reflection shadow will be going down into these bushes here, so if it was a solid, real dark shadow, it would kind of blend with those areas. When I do it lighter like this, my figure will seem, farther back in the distance, okay? Just stamp them out about like so. All right. So I have our little character right here. Yeah, we can use a little bit of a overhang, I think, would be good. What I mean by that is just something to kind of frame off the top. Let's just use it in black as well. Maybe it would be good to do some of these overhangs in pink. I don't know. I don't have like a pink pigment ink or Brilliance ink, though. So let's just go with black. Okay. Let's see how that kind of frames off that side. Let's do it even heavier. Okay, and right over here. Kind of frames things off compositionally, doesn't it? Okay. All right, so anyways, that is how to apply different types of media, but working within the same color theme, okay, to achieve a varied textural result, but working within the same color theme, okay? So you can have the benefit of, different types of textures that the different types of inks provide. Dye-based inks are transparent and thin. Okay, they provide kind of this, this foundation in here. Alcohol inks, they have that kind of shinier look to them when you apply them, and especially when they're built up. Acrylic paint pens are great for details, and I guess you can color in some areas, but they're really better in line and kind of dot types of applications, not filling in vast areas like this, okay? There's bigger pens, than the 0.7 extra fines, but they're really great for creating that textural kind of lighting when it comes to scenic stamping. And then white was a part of the paper. We use that in the paint pens, and then we have this kind of diffused, soft-looking white working in there as well. So it's using the different media for their strengths and using them in combination with one another to give us a certain varied look within our pieces. And when you work in these very light shades into the medium shades and then darker, if you do go into darker tones like that, you're taking your whole color families incrementally through the value scale, going from something very light into the darker tones. I work mostly in the lighter tones, with all my different color schemes, and the darker tones tend to be, kind of limited to shadows. A lot of times it's on the corners of my cards and whatnot. But it makes for a really user-friendly type of approach when doing things that way. Okay, so anyways, hope this lesson came in handy for you. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks as always for tuning into the channel.